Y'all ready to hear another story of Bubba Batman? Well, I'm sitting here just raring to tell you another one, and got thinking back and all the stories and stuff that's happened, and I thought I'd go back to the very beginning. You know, one of my movies was called Batman Begins. Well, this little video today is going to be about how Batman begins, or how he started. Anyhow, back when I was about 8 years old, it was in 1966. The first time I ever heard anything about Batman or decided I wanted to be Batman is there was this TV show come on with this guy named Adam West. And this is a picture out up here of him playing me. But it played for a few years, and when I got to watching that show, oh my goodness, I got set on fire. I knew right then and there that that's who I was. And there wasn't no denying it, no doubt about it. That's who I was. I was Batman. And I aimed to fight crime, and I started out fighting it in the school that I went to. I think I was in the second grade at that time. And there was a bunch of criminals that needed to be done away with and captured and thrown in jail and everything. So I started doing that. Now, my first Batman get up, my grandma made for me. And she sewed fixed me up a cape and a shirt with a bat on it. And I found me a mask. And I, every day, I even wore it on the school bus. And I went to school, and especially during recess, I was out there chasing criminals every day and pursuing them and catching them and throwing them in jail. And, you know, one day, I was chasing this criminal. I forget what he had done, but he needed to be put in jail. So I was chasing him, and I was in this pursuit. And he cut a corner around the swing set, and there was a big old mud hole. And when I cut that corner around the swing set trying to catch him, he missed the mud hole, and I fell slap down, face down in it. And I got my Batman get up, covered from head to toe, face, chest, belly, everything. Cape, all of it. Oh, it was a disgusting thing, but I couldn't go the rest of the school. That was the first recess of the day. So I went to the principal's office. And the principal there was named Mr. Loden. And I walked in. Like I said, I was in the second grade. I was 8 years old. And I walked in there. And Mr. Loden reminded me a whole lot of Commissioner Gordon on that TV show. And to me, that's who he was. He was Commissioner Gordon. Well, I walked in the door, and Mr. Loden, a.k.a. Commissioner Gordon, he turned around and he looked at me from his desk. And he started chuckling and laughing. And he said, "Well, Batman, looks like you had a hard morning this morning." And I said, "Yes, sir. I need to call my grandpa, bring me a change of clothes where I can go to school the rest of the day and not wear this muddy get-up." And you know, from that day forward to the last time I saw him, when I was 18 years old, he always called me Batman. He knew who I was. He knew exactly who I was. Met him on the court square in my hometown. One day I was going in there to get something, buy my tag for a vehicle or something. And he was walking out. He later on became the superintendent of education of our county. And he saw me, and he throwed up his hand and waved and said, "Well, hey there, Batman." He knew who I was. But the today's story that Brother Jerry wants to teach parable from is something that happened 2 years after I became Batman in the second grade. It was in the fourth grade. And one morning I come to school and got in there early, and before classes ever started and the bell rung to get everything going, all the kids was playing, and I noticed a bunch of boys in that classroom was throwing around this stuff like putty, like silly putty you used to buy. And they'd mold it, mashed it around, everything, but they'd playing ball pitch with it and doing stuff with it and molding it and like clay and doing stuff with it. And And I walked over to one of them and I asked him, I said, where'd y'all get that? And this went on, first of all, for several days, and nobody would tell me what it was. And finally, one day, I called the guy outside and I said, look now, I want to know where everybody, all you guys, are getting this putty, because I'd like to get me some and play with y'all. Well, he called me aside. He said, well, we'll tell you, but it's secret, and you can't tell nobody. And I said, well, I ain't going to tell nobody. And he said, well, meet us at recess and we'll get you some putty. So, anyway, I went with him at recess bell, and he carried us around. They was in the process of building a brand new first and second grade building adjoining the building that we was having classes in, a brand new building. And there's about 4 or 5 of us boys got together. I got with them, and then we went around to the back side of that building where there wasn't nobody at, and they had just installed new windows in this new building. And I watched them boys. They'd raise up real high with their finger, and they'd take that little finger and they'd stick it in the crack around that window, and they'd rake that putty out. And they'd ball it up. And that's where they're getting their putties, the putty around the windows in that new building. And I got me some, and boy, I was tickled. I was just like the rest of the boys, and we was playing and everything. And that went on for a day or two, and then all of a sudden one morning, come over the intercom overhead in the schoolroom that the commissioner, Mr. Loden, he called a bunch of boys' names. And guess what? Mine was one of them. And it didn't sound good. Anyway, he called us all together and he said to go into the auditorium. And it ended up there was a whole lot more boys involved in this than I thought. It was more than just them 4 or 5. There was about 10 or 12 boys that was getting putty out of them windows. And he got us all lined up in the front row in that auditorium. Now, Mr. Loden looked like a bulldog. He was an intimidating man. I didn't know what the word meant then. I just knew he scared me when he was upset. And he was upset today. And he got us all lined up, and we was all sitting there just knees knocking and just a shaking and a quivering, scared to death, wondering what was going to happen. He's going to give us a whooping or tell our parents or what. And he's just pacing back and forth, and he ain't saying nothing, and that's making it even worse. And we wonder what's going to happen next. We're scared to death. And he walks along that line, kind of looking the other way past everybody as he walks. And he ain't looking at anybody, but he starts giving us a lecture about tearing up school property. And how that new school building, the windows were falling out because of us pulling the putty out of them to play with. And I got to be honest, I didn't know what my outcome was going to be. And more than being afraid of Mr. Loden, I was afraid of Pa and Mom. Anyhow, he was walking down in front of everybody, but what got me was he walked down and he stopped right in front of me. And he wasn't looking at me first. He was looking off to the side, but then he turned and he looked me square in the eye. And he said, "And you, Batman, you, of all people, I'd have never thought you'd have been guilty of doing nothing like that." That's the truth. He called me Batman, and he made me really see the severity that of all people, a superhero like me, doing something like that. Because I didn't get in trouble like that. I didn't do stuff like that normally, but man, this time I did, and I got caught, and I was guilty. And I was so ashamed, and I was so scared. But it ended up that everything, he let us off as long as we didn't go back over there and get no more of that putty, and we didn't. And the school windows stayed in the building, and Commissioner Gordon did not tell Pa and Mom about it. I think I told him about it 2 or 3 years after the fact, just confessed up because my conscience was bothering me. But anyway, that's my story for today. And Brother Jerry will be back out here in a minute, and he's got a parable he wants to tell you about that. So I'm going to go get him, and I'll be right back. Hello, everybody. I tell you what, Batman, he was really disappointed in himself, even at that young age, and realized who he is supposed to be and what he is supposed to be doing. And man, the guilt of that just stuck with him his whole life. And he really didn't want to disappoint Commissioner Gordon or Mr. Loden. And he sure didn't want to disappoint his grandparents because he loved them dearly. But that part about the windows and all that little Bubba Batman did that day, it teaches us a lesson in the fact that the Bible tells us that, and we've looked at this passage in other lessons in times past, but everybody sins. Everybody. The Romans chapter 3 and verse 10 says that there's none righteous, no, not one. Verse 23, we have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We all sin. Nobody can live above it. Only Jesus Christ could do that. But a lot of times in this world, we look at people and we think of some people as being just sinful and hopeless. And then we look up to others that we look to as like examples, and maybe clergy and biblical leaders and preachers and evangelists and others that's supposed to be setting an example. But when they stumble and when they fall, that really, really is upsetting and disappointing. And a lot of people criticize religion and Christianity because of the humanity of the leaders within it that stumble and fall. But the Bible has a lot to say about all that. In the Old Testament, we read about King David, the second king over Israel, God's people. The Bible called him the man after God's own heart. He's a man and he wrote the Psalms and was so deeply searching the heart of God and trying to worship him and please him and serve him in every way. But one day, when he walked out on his roof and he looked down, and there was a woman he could see down below that was bathing, and she was attractive, and he made up his mind right then and there, just like that he was going to have her. And that desire from a man that was pursuing the heart of God, that sinful desire overwhelmed him to the point that he committed adultery, and also that led to the committing of murder and of lying. And all in all, he broke at least 4 of the great 10 commandments through that event that took place that day. And that child, and there was a child that came out of that relationship, and God took the life of that child as a punishment for David's sin. But David, when he stumbled and fell and realized what he'd done, when Nathan the prophet came to him and told him, "You're the man that did this," he humbly repented and turned his heart and his life back over to God. He fell, but he got back up. Bible's full of people like that. Even Jesus' own followers of the 12 apostles. Jesus was especially close to 3 of his apostles, Peter, James, and John. And he'd carried them on many of the events of like the Transfiguration and other instances. And even when he went to the garden before he was carried to be crucified, he carried Peter, James, and John with him there to pray with him. But in one instance, close to that event, the Last Supper, when Jesus met with his disciples, he knew what was about to happen. And he was trying to prepare them for what was ahead. They still didn't get it. But I want to read to you what, in particular, the Lord said to Peter. In Luke's account, in Luke chapter 22, verses 31 through 34. We read these words. He said, Simon, Simon, and that's Peter, Simon Peter, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. But he said, I've been praying for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you've turned back, strengthen your brothers. But he replied, that is, Peter replied, Lord, I am ready to die with you, and to prison, and to go to prison and to go to death for you. Jesus answered, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times that you even know me. We go on to read in verse 54 of the same chapter, Luke 22. Then seizing him later on there in the garden where they went to pray, the mob came to get him, being led by Judas. Said, then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. And when some of there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard, and he sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, this man was with him. But Peter denied it. Woman, I don't know him, he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, you also are one of them. Man, I am not, Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, certainly this fellow's with him, for he's a Galilean. Peter replied, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed, and the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord had spoken unto him, before the rooster crows today, you'll disown me 3 times. And he went outside and he wept bitterly. Yeah, Peter, he loved the Lord. And in just minutes, or just a few hours earlier, he said, I'll die for you. I'll go to prison. I'll do anything. There's no way I'll ever disown you or deny you. And he believed it. He meant it. But then he did. He fell. You know, even the Apostle Paul warned about thinking that we're so strong. He said, to him that thinketh he standeth, take heed lest he fall. He said in 1 Corinthians 9:27, he said that I have to buffet my body. That the word buffet means beat and bruise myself into subjection, lest while I preach to others, I can be a castaway. Anybody can fall, and we all fall. But in all of these cases, with David, with Peter, with Paul, these are people who, though even when they fell, but they got up. And by the strength of the Lord, God still used them in a mighty way. Peter in particular, just like Jesus had said, he knew he would do what he did, but he also knew he'd turn back and he'd come back home and he would be the one to strengthen the other brothers. And Peter, just like Jesus prophesied, took the keys to the kingdom in Acts chapter 2 and preached the first gospel sermon. And that day, 3,000 souls obeyed the gospel, and the church was established in Jerusalem and began to spread throughout the world, because Peter, though he fell, God restored him and brought him back. Just remember that when you fall, it's disappointing, it hurts. Just like these biblical examples, just like Bubba Batman with that putty in his hands. And when Mr. Loden just looked at him and said, and you, Batman, I'd never believed you'd have done that. Well, we do. But by the grace of God, today is a new day. When we wake up in the morning, we can say that. It's a day to start all over, to hit the reset button, and to put the Lord first in your life. Well, that's our parable for today, based on the story Bubba Batman told, and I hope that it's encouraging to you. If you will, if you haven't already, please subscribe and share the channel. and give us some likes, and let's do what we can to promote it and try to reach out to someone to give them a little enjoyment of the stories that Bubba Batman tells and the lessons that I'll try to share with you. But it's been a joy to speak to you for a few moments today, and I wish God's greatest blessings to each and every one of you. God bless you.